The absence of prying advisors and inquisitive priests left Diablo free to assume total control over the king's battered soul. As the Lord of Terror attempted to strengthen his hold upon the maddened king, he found that the lingering spirit of Leoric fought with him still. Although the control over Leoric that Diablo held was formidable, the demon knew that in his weakened state he could never take complete possession of his soul as long as a glimmer of his will remained. The demon lord sought a fresh and innocent host upon which to build his terror. The demon relinquished his control over Leoric, but the king's soul was left corrupted and his mind crazed. Diablo began to search throughout Khanduras for the perfect vessel to act as his focus, and found such a soul easily within his reach. Enjoined by his dark master, Lazarus kidnapped Albrecht, the only son of Leoric, and dragged the terrified youth down into the blackness of the labyrinth. Flooding the boy's defenseless mind with the essence of pure terror, Diablo easily took possession of the young Albrecht. Pain and fire raced through the child's soul. Hideous laughter filled his head and clouded his thoughts. Paralyzed with fear, Albrecht felt the presence of Diablo within his mind as it seemed to push him down, deeper and deeper into darkness and oblivion. Diablo gazed upon his surroundings through the eyes of the young prince. A lustful hunger still tortured the demon after his frustrating bout for control over Leoric, but the nightmares of the boy provided ample substance to sate him. Reaching deep into Albrecht's subconscious, Diablo ripped the greatest fears of the child from their hiding places and gave them breath. Albrecht watched, as if out of a dream. Twisted and disfigured forms appeared all around him. Unholy writhing visages of terror danced about him, chanting choruses of obscenities. All of the monsters that he had ever imagined or believed that he had seen in his life became flesh and were given life before him. Large bodies, comprised of living rock, erupted from the walls and bowed to their dark master. The ancient skeletal corpses of the Horadrim arose from archaic crypts and lumbered off into the red-washed corridors beyond. As the cacophony of madness and nightmares hammered its final blow against Albrecht's shattered spirit, the bloodlusted ghouls and demons of his mind scattered and scrambled maniacally into the lengthening passageways of his waking nightmare. The ancient catacombs of the Horadrim had become a twisted labyrinth of raw, focused terror. Empowered by Diablo's possession of young Albrecht, the creatures of the boy's own imagination had gained corporeal form. So strong was the terror that grew inside of Albrecht that the borders of the mortal realm began to warp and tear. The burning hell began to seep into the world of man and take root within the labyrinth. Beings and occurrences, displaced by time and space, and long lost to the history of man, were pulled screaming into the ever-expanding domain. The body of Albrecht, fully possessed by Diablo, began to distort and change. The small boy grew, and his eyes blazed as tendril-like spines ripped through his flesh. Great arched horns erupted from Albrecht's skull, as Diablo altered the form of the child to match that of his demonic body. Deep within the recesses of the labyrinth, a growing power was being harnessed. When the moment was right, Diablo would venture once more into the mortal world and free his captive brothers, Mephisto and Baal. The prime evils would be reunited, and together they would reclaim their rightful place in hell. The war against the zealous armies of Westmarch ended with a horrible slaughter, with the army of Khanduras ripped to shreds by the superior numbers and defensive positions of Westmarch. Lochdannen quickly gathered together those who were not captured or killed, and ordered a retreat back to the safety of Khanduras. They returned to find the town of Tristram in shambles. King Leoric, deep within the throes of madness, went into a rage when he learned that his son was missing. After scouring the village with the few guards that remained with him at the monastery, Leoric had decided that the townsfolk had abducted his son and hidden him somewhere. Although the townsfolk denied any knowledge of Prince Albrecht's whereabouts, Leoric insisted that they had crafted a conspiracy against him, and that they would pay the price for such treachery. The mysterious disappearance of the Archbishop Lazarus left no one in Tristram with whom the king would take counsel. Overcome by grief and dementia, Leoric had many of the townsfolk executed for the crime of high treason. As Lochdonan and his fellow survivors returned to confront their king, Leoric sent his few remaining guards against them. Believing that Lochdonan was somehow part of the townsfolk's conspiracy, Leoric decreed that he and his party were to die. Lochdonan, finally realizing that Leoric was beyond salvation, ordered his men to defend themselves. The ensuing battle carried them down into the very halls of the darkened monastery, bringing a final desecration to the once holy sanctum of the Horadrim. Lochdonan won a bittersweet victory, as his men were forced to kill all of Leoric's deceived protectors. They cornered the ravenous king within his own sanctuary, and begged him to explain the atrocities he had committed. Leoric only spat at them, and cursed them for traitors against both his crown and the light. Lochdonan walked slowly towards his king, and sorrowfully drew his sword. Full of grief and rage, all honor having been cast to the winds, Lochdonan ran his blade through Leoric's shriveled, blackened heart. The once noble king screamed an unearthly death cry, and as his madness finally overtook him, he brought down a curse upon those who had so betrayed him. Calling upon the forces of darkness that he had spent his entire life combating, Leoric condemned Lochdonan and the others to eternal damnation. In that last fleeting moment within the heart of the monastery, all that was ever virtuous or honorable about the stewards of Khanduras was shattered forever. The Black King lay dead, slain at the hands of his own priests and knights. The young Prince Albrecht was still missing, and the proud defenders of Khanduras were no more. The people of Tristram looked about their lifeless town and were greatly dismayed. Awash in feelings of both relief and remorse, they soon realized that their troubles had merely begun. Strange, eerie lights appeared in the darkened windows of the monastery. Misshapen, leathery-skinned creatures were seen venturing forth from the shadows of the church. Horrible, wounded cries seemed to linger on the wind, emanating from deep underground. It became apparent that something quite unnatural had infested the once holy site. Travelers on the road surrounding Tristram were accosted by cloaked riders that seemed to now constantly roam the deserted countryside. Many villagers fled Tristram, making their way to other towns or kingdoms, fearing some unnamed evil that seemed to wait in the shadows all around them. Those few who chose to remain seldom ventured out at night, and never tread foot upon the grounds of the cursed monastery. Whispered rumors of poor, innocent people being abducted in the night by wicked, nightmarish creatures filled the halls of the local inn. With no king, no law, and no army left to defend them, many of the townsfolk began to fear an attack from the things that now dwelt beneath their town. The Archbishop Lazarus, frayed and disheveled, returned from his absence and assured the townsfolk that he, too, had been ravaged by the growing evil of the monastery. With their desperate need for reassurance clouding their good judgment, Lazarus whipped the townspeople into a frenzied mob. Reminding them that Prince Albrecht was still unaccounted for, he persuaded many of the men to follow him into the depths of the monastery to search for the boy. They gathered torches, and soon the night air glowed with the flickering light of hope. They armed themselves with shovels, picks, and scythes, and so prepared, they boldly followed the treacherous archbishop straight into the fiery maw of hell itself. The few who survived the horrible fate that awaited them returned to Tristram and recounted what they could of the ordeal. Their wounds were terrible, and even the skills of the healer could not save some of them. As the stories of demons and devils spread, a stifling primal terror began to consume the hearts of all of the town's inhabitants. It was a terror that none of them had ever known. Deep beneath the foundations of the ruined monastery, Diablo gorged himself upon the fears of the mortals above him. He slowly sank back into the welcoming shadows and began to harness his depleted power. He smiled to himself in the sheltering darkness, for he knew that the time of his final victory was fast approaching. It was long ago that the enigmatic Archangel Tyrael bestowed upon us the secrets of the mysterious Soulstones. Tyrael bequested upon our order 3 of these stones, so we could contain the vile essences of the 3 prime evils who had been let loose upon our world. Although the artifacts were constructed in realms far removed from our own, we found that they were simple to understand. The Soulstones affect only beings that are non-corporeal, and thus have no power over living, breathing creatures. When invoked, the Soulstones bring into being a strong spiritual vacuum. Any non-physical entities caught within this vacuum are drawn into the burning recesses of the Soulstone, and are forever trapped within. These spirits are released only when the Soulstone is deactivated or destroyed. The power of the Soulstones proved to be much more difficult to employ when used against the great prime evils. Voraciously disposed to possessing hapless mortals, the 3 brothers found that they were immune to the effects of the stones while occupying human souls. Sadly, we were forced to hunt down and kill the innocent victims of the prime evils, so that their demonic essences could be subject to the effects of the Soulstones. Mephisto and Diablo, once found, were easily lured into the Soulstones. The capture of their brother Baal, however, became complicated when the Soulstone that was to be his eternal prison was shattered and fragmented. We found that while the shards still held the power to lure the demon to them, they could not properly contain it. Tal Rasha, a fellow initiate who has since been immortalized in Horadrim lore, theorized that a mortal of strong will might be able to contain Baal within his own mortal soul. This sacrifice meant that the essence of any mortal so chosen would be forever tortured, while locked in eternal conflict with the enthralled demon. To this end, Tal Rasha volunteered to contain the raging Lord of Destruction. Piercing his breast with a shard of the Soulstone, Tal Rasha took within himself the essence of Baal, the Lord of Destruction. The initiate's body was shackled, chained, and buried deep within a tomb under the desert. The sacrifice of Tal Rasha has kept Baal imprisoned for many years now, and although the demon was imprisoned without the use of a whole Soulstone, we believe that our victory may be a hollow one. Should Tal Rasha ever escape, he would have the formidable powers of Baal added to his own. By ridding the world of this present evil, we may have created a nightmare worse than that which we first sought to contain.